8 strange facts about Cleopatra that you didn't know. 1500 years before the golden era of Queen Elizabeth I of England began, in 50 BC, Cleopatra was already showing the civilized world that a woman was capable of successfully ruling a nation. And while there is no doubt that Cleopatra has been one of the most successful and powerful women in history, much of what we know about the last great queen of the Nile comes from questionable accounts that either sought to exalt her or defame her. Thanks to her iconic romances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, Cleopatra's figure has been portrayed by Hollywood as a kind of irresistible femme fatale. But she was much more than a shrewd seductress. So much has been said over the centuries that today many of the myths about Cleopatra are often the most well-known. But this doesn't mean that many confirmed facts can't be surprising and sometimes strange. That's why today we'll look at 8 strange facts about Cleopatra that you probably didn't know. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay up to date with our latest updates. 1. She wasn't actually Egyptian. You might find it strange to think that the last queen of Egypt wasn't actually Egyptian, but it's easier to understand than it seems. Cleopatra belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, founded in 305 BC by the Greek Ptolemy I, who was a loyal companion and general of the legendary Alexander the Great. Egypt was part of Alexander's ancient empire, and after his death, the vast empire fragmented. Ptolemy managed to take control of Egypt, assimilated some aspects of Egyptian culture, and ruled as pharaoh until his death, turning it into a Hellenistic kingdom and its capital Alexandria into a center of Greek culture. Although Cleopatra was born in Egyptian territory, during her childhood she was more in tune with Greek and Macedonian culture than with Egyptian culture. But unlike the rest of her family, the young queen ended up adopting many of Egypt's ancient customs, and she was the first and only ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty to learn to speak the Egyptian language. 2. Even though her ancestry was Greek, there is no certainty that she was 100% Hellenic. We already mentioned that all of Cleopatra's family descended from the Greek Macedonian general Ptolemy, but at least 250 years passed before Cleopatra's birth, and dozens of generations, including all those possible love entanglements so common in palace life. During that time, Egypt's population, including Alexandria, was home to people of various ethnicities, so it's likely that Cleopatra's Greek heritage had mixed before she was born, leaving us unsure of her true racial identity. 3. Her name wasn't unique. When we think of Cleopatra, it's almost certain that only one queen comes to mind. However, this is far from the truth. The Cleopatra we all know was named Cleopatra VII Philopator, meaning she was actually the 7th woman of the Ptolemaic dynasty to bear that distinctive name from ancient Greek, which we can translate as glory of her father. 4. She always sought to make a dramatic entrance. To reinforce her status and win over potential allies, Cleopatra often used fine and elaborate costumes to make planned dramatic entrances. Whenever she appeared, she did so with great elegance, seeking to leave a strong impression on whoever was watching. While she was fighting with her brother for the throne of Egypt in 48 BC, she took advantage of Julius Caesar's visit to the palace of Alexandria. She wrapped herself in a carpet and, with the help of her servant, sneaked into the quarters occupied by the Roman. Julius Caesar was enchanted by the young queen's appearance. She captivated him so much that he became her political ally and later, her lover. 7 years later, the seductive empress would make a similar appearance before Mark Antony, when she asked to meet with him before he left for Tarsus. History tells us that Cleopatra arrived in a golden barge adorned with purple sails and silver oars. The pharaoh queen was dressed as the goddess Venus and lay under a canopy, while servants dressed as Cupid fanned her and burned sweet-smelling incense. Mark Antony was enchanted when he saw her, and it wasn't long before he divorced his Roman wife and married Cleopatra a few years later. 5. Cleopatra was living in Rome when Julius Caesar was assassinated. Both Cleopatra and the son she had with Julius Caesar, Caesarion, had been living in their own palace just across the Tiber River, where Julius Caesar's house was located. The famous romance caused great scandal in Rome. Julius Caesar had just become the most powerful man in Rome, making it unbearable for the Romans that the son he had with the pharaoh queen, as his heir, might eventually want to rule Rome. The contempt grew when it became evident that Julius Caesar was neglecting his wife Calpurnia, a Roman of noble birth, to be with his lover Cleopatra. After Julius Caesar's death in 44 BC, Cleopatra and her son had to leave Rome and never return. 6. She got rid of all her siblings. In Egypt, it was an ancestral custom for pharaohs to rule as a pair. Cleopatra ruled alongside her father, Ptolemy XII, for a short time until he died in 51 BC. In his will, Ptolemy XII decreed that Cleopatra should marry her 11-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII, and rule together. However, a war between the two siblings broke out shortly thereafter. Cleopatra was dethroned and forced into exile in Syria. 3 years later, thanks to Julius Caesar's intervention, Cleopatra was reinstated as queen. Ptolemy XIII never agreed with the decision to rule alongside his sister, so he later rose in arms again. Julius Caesar, Cleopatra's ally and lover, organized an army and finally defeated Ptolemy in the Battle of the Nile, where he drowned while trying to escape. One could say that Cleopatra was partially responsible for her brother's death, but the story doesn't end there, as every ruler must have a co-ruler. Cleopatra had to marry her other brother, Ptolemy XIV. When Julius Caesar was assassinated in Rome, Cleopatra realized that her son Caesarion would not be recognized and that their lives were in danger in Rome, so she returned to Egypt. It wasn't long before her co-ruler brother died under mysterious circumstances, possibly poisoned. She then instigated Mark Antony to order the execution of her sister, Arsinoe IV, who had sided with Ptolemy XIII during the family civil war years earlier, and at one point had declared herself queen. With that, Cleopatra and her son were the only Ptolemies left. 7. Her strange anti-aging routines. Cleopatra couldn't tolerate the idea of aging, and as queen she could afford to follow costly beauty regimens. The queen's favorite treatment was something peculiar. It's said that it consisted of a bath that required a tub and 700 lactating donkeys. At first this might sound like a whim she invented to keep her servants busy, but bathing in donkey milk wasn't such a crazy idea. Today, donkey milk is used in beauty products. 8. Her supposed beauty is a myth. In almost all modern representations of Cleopatra, we are led to believe that she was incredibly attractive, but the fact that ancient historians spoke little or nothing about her appearance seems to suggest that she wasn't as extraordinarily beautiful as we are led to believe. In February 2007, a coin with Cleopatra's portrait was unearthed, which seems to confirm that the Egyptian queen had a rather ordinary appearance. And in the writings of the historian Plutarch, the following observation was made about her. Her actual beauty was not so remarkable that no one could be compared to her, but the contact of her presence was irresistible. It seems that her intellect, wit, charm, and the sweetness in the tones of her voice were what truly made her irresistible.